too many children are spending far too much time looking at tiny screens. And it behooves us to, just like we want to get our chickens outdoors, we want to get our children outdoors, out into the open, out into nature and its amazing networks and processes. And one way to draw them into that is to get them involved in this project of keeping a group of chickens in the backyard. And they will be learning far more about natural life and natural processes that way than they will ever learn from looking at tiny screens.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. What does it take to raise chickens in the backyard? Is it hard? And what is the payoff, in addition to delicious and nutritious fresh eggs? This is episode 378, and our guest today is Harvey Ussery. Harvey is an experienced farmer and the author of the Small-Scale Poultry Flock. Today, you have a front row seat in this Backyard Chickens 101 class. Harvey covers the ins and outs of what it takes to have backyard chickens, including how to get started, understanding your county's regulations, how to source your chicks, the kind of shelter they need, how to avoid chicken coop stink, and more. He discusses feed and the importance of allowing chickens to roam about and feast on earthworms, grubs, slugs, and snails, since they are omnivores after all. In sum, he makes a great and entertaining case for giving backyard chickens a go. This is our fourth episode in the Resilience series of the podcast. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to invite you to become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. I'm telling you, the time is now. It's important to join hands with like-minded community to create the kind of world we want to live in. So do it. Step up and help those who are confused about what real nutrition is and how to build health and resilience. Go to westonaprice.org and click on the Become a Member button on the homepage. Or just to make it easier, I'll include a link in the show description. And join us. Membership is only $30 a year when you use the code POD10. And thank you in advance. Welcome to the family. And Bubble MB. Bubble MB has more than 150 different products to choose from, many of which are USDA certified organic. Their products include organic insect repellent, and who isn't looking for that this time of year? Organic body butters, palm-free soaps with really simple ingredients, and compostable packaging. They've got facial cleansers, shower gel, lip balms, the works. And Bubble & Bee also offers the world's largest line of USDA-certified organic deodorants for all skin types, including the super cute and punnily named, if I can say that, Pit Putty and Pit Perfect. They've got natural salt scrubs, shampoos with none of the bad stuff. You've got to go check them out at bubbleandbee.com. And if you have a question, you can email the owner of the company directly. It's customer service that can't be beat. So go to bubbleandbee.com right now and use the code WISE for 15% off at checkout. That's bubbleandbee.com and the code WISE. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Harvey.
Thank you very much, Hilda, for having me.
My pleasure. So we are going to talk about how to get started with chickens. I know you've been doing this for decades, really. How did you get started, Harvey? And were chickens your first farm animal?
Well, we could go way back and say that I was always interested in the chickens that my grandmother had. She and my grandfather lived on a small farm, and she had a flock of chickens, tremendously productive and managed quite naturally. They fed themselves almost entirely on their own. So that made a big impression upon me. And then when we moved out here to the country in Northern Virginia, my daughter was living with us and she wanted to have chickens. So we approved her project and she set up a brooder for raising some chicks, 26 New Hampshire chicks. And that was not only successful, but it was pretty easy.
Oh, wow. Well, that's just what I wanted to hear, Harvey, because now is a time when people are concerned about food security They're also building their own kind of self-reliance, and chickens might be a great place to start. So let's talk first about what you need to know about where you live and what's permitted. Talk to us a little bit about regulation.
Well, you do have to be aware of and comply with the current regulations with some caveats. Fortunately, there has been a relaxation over recent years on keeping chickens for a long time in suburbs and city settings. Keeping chickens was strictly prohibited. In recent years, there's been a lot of relaxation on that. Keep in mind that even if regulations are quite restrictive, some people get away with having a kind of under the radar flock, which if it's small and quiet and doesn't cause a problem with their neighbors, usually the powers that be are not going to send in the posse, right? If there's no problem for your neighbors. And so keep that in mind. Whatever the restrictions say, you don't want to create a nuisance for your neighbor. And keep in mind the possibility of going before your local regulatory agency of whatever sort and making an appeal for relaxation of the regulation. We attended a meeting before our board of supervisors, and they were considering whether to relax the regulations. And it didn't look too good for us until these two little boys got up, and one of them said, my pet goat doesn't smell bad, and she's never bitten anybody. And it was not a surprise after that they did relax the regulations.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, we need to know what's going on around us. And then also one concern folks have before they get rolling is how tied down am I going to be with a backyard flock of chickens? Talk to us about how easy care the chickens are, as you like to say.
Well, I like to say that chickens are the ideal starter livestock. They're easier than any of the other options to get started and to keep going. And so for that very reason, I think that chickens do not have to tie you down because their care is very easy. And of course, for your own sake, you're going to want to set up their daily care so it is most efficient, most pleasant to deal with. And therefore, if you have a friend or a neighbor close by, if it's easy for you to do the daily care, it'll be easy for them to as well. And in exchange, they can get the daily take-home payoff of eggs, the best eggs they've ever eaten. And so it's never been a problem for us finding somebody who can pinch hit for us when we have to be away.
Right. Awesome. Well, and we'll get into the daily care in a bit, what it is required when you are going to have some chickens. But I want to ask you next about where you can source them. Is it true that you can get chicks by mail?
Yes, there are, of course, local sources you could seek out. But yes, just hatched chicks can be sent through the mail. Now, people don't understand how that can be possible, but as a matter of fact, in nature, sometimes there's a difference of quite a while, 16 hours a day, between the hatch of the first sibling in a clutch and the last. And so nature's provision for that is that just before hatch, the chick absorbs the last of the nutrients from the yolk. So they have in their system sufficient nutrients that they don't have to have free feed and water for 2 days easily, even up to 3 days. So it's in that on hold, that pause period after hatch that they can be sent through the mail safely and without any problem.
So if you do get these just hatched chicks, you probably need a brooder, right? Talk to us. What is that exactly and why is that needed?
I always like to put it this way, that you're going to be raising these chicks, and that's really pretty easy to do as long as you keep in mind you are mama. And so you need to provide or set up ways to provide everything that the mother hen would supply. She supplies her bodily warmth to keep them warm. She helps them find food and water. She protects them from predators. So Any setup that provides these conditions, that's what we would call a brooder. And you can buy a small brooder, well designed to cover all those functions. You can make your own. Our first flock, we started in a refrigerator carton. And so it's really easy to set up for providing those conditions. For the warmth, a heat lamp or an electric heating element. That heat lamp, by the way, it's usually a 250 watt bulb, should be secured at least 18 inches from a flammable surface. And you can raise or lower the heat lamp as needed by the chicks, or you can get a heating element with a rheostat control. You can dial up or down the temperature. And, they say keep the temperature at 95 degrees and drop it 5 degrees every week. You don't really need to use a thermometer. Just look at the chicks. If they're huddling under the source of warmth, it's too warm and you need to lower the temperature. If they're kind of backed up against the inner walls of the brooder to get away from the heat source, it's too warm and you need to turn the heat source down.
Now, when you were talking about keeping it far from a flammable surface, I felt like you were talking from experience.
No, other than that you learn from other people's experience. And yes, I have read actual cases where people were careless with this element of having a 250 watt bulb too close to flammable materials and lost their barn or shed wherever they had the chicks. This is for real, yes.
So those little chicks need to be in this kind of brooder situation, mimicking what the mother hen would be offering them for 3 to 5 weeks or so. Is that right? And then do they need to be transferred to a coop? Is that the next step in the process?
Yes, once they are well feathered so that they can maintain their body temperature more efficiently on their own, they're ready to go into the coop, whatever sort of housing you're providing for them. And it's just like with brooders. Housing can be just an incredible array of options. Doesn't have to be elaborate as long as it provides the essentials: security against predators and protection from the extremes of harsh weather. It's important to remember that chickens are actually quite hardy, and especially in the wintertime, people tend to look for a way to add heat in the wintertime housing. That's probably a mistake. Now, I'm not talking about people in Alaska and northern Canada. I haven't dealt with those situations. But for mid-Atlantic winters, where it gets pretty cold, I think it's a mistake to add heat in the winter housing. It is certainly a mistake to make the winter housing too tight, too closed up. You want plenty of ventilation through the housing at all times. You want the chickens out of the direct blast of a harsh winter wind. You want them out of blowing wind, blowing rain or snow. But as long as they're not in the direct blast of the wind, as long as they can stay dry, they can take a lot of chill. And actually, the plenty of airflow through there is far better than keeping them tightly enclosed and adding heat.
Oh, very interesting. So they're not little humans that we want to keep at a certain temperature. They're hardy. They can manage.
Quite hardy, yes.
That's encouraging. Now, another thing I found interesting, because you gave me some resources to look at before we spoke, you mentioned that they need housing also because they need to be protected, as you just said, from predators and so forth, but that they also tend to poop and do half of their pooping in the coop or in their shelter. So the chickens can do some of the work here for you in terms of cleanup. Can you explain that?
So now we're going to talk about the nasty, right? The unpleasant, the stinky, the big pain in the rear. That's what we're talking about now?
Yes, that's what we're talking about
Hilda, now. It doesn't have to be that way. And this is the good news. When it comes to manure management, during the day, we want our chickens outside where natural processes are more likely to take care of any problem, potential problem of the poops. But as you say, at night, they're doing half of their pooping in there. And we can either let the manure accumulate and become not only unpleasant for us and frankly unpleasant for them, but also can create health problems for them. And so the answer is either frequent mucking out, as people call it, and putting that fresh manure into a compost heap and composting it properly. And eventually, yes, you'll get compost that you can use in the garden. But the alternative, that constant mucking out, that sounds like a lot of work to me.
It does.
It sounds like signing up for an unpleasant chore for as long as you have chicken. Well, I've got an alternative. Which mimics natural processes that deal with manure everywhere in nature. All the animals everywhere, they're pooping all the time. They're not creating a problematic mess. So in the chicken house, the key to proper manure management and far more pleasant conditions in the coop is deep litter. That is kind of imitating a compost heap. Well, most of us know about how a compost heap works, and kind of imitating that model with one change. Rather than having a balance between carbon and nitrogen, we want as much carbon in the litter materials as possible. Very high carbon, loose, easily worked by the chickens. Dry autumn leaves are terrific. Wood shavings, as long as it's not an aromatic wood shavings like cedar. Wood chips, if they're well aged, that is not when they're green, they've just been chipped, but age them a while and wood chips can serve. Shredded paper or cardboard would also be high carbon litter, easily worked by the chickens. So they're constantly scratching in and working in the manure into that material, which they are shredding with their scratching. And eventually the microbes in that, just like in a compost heap, break down the manure and turn it into a resource. We call it compost. And let me tell you, you can dig down into that deep litter and pick up some of that fine granular material at the bottom and smell it. And believe me, you are not smelling anything remotely like raw manure. You're smelling something like fresh earth. And just one final plea for use of deep litter as the best possible manure management. I'm going to quote my longtime mentor, Joel Salatin, who said, and I want your listeners to really reflect on that, because they are thinking this manure thing, that is the stinky part, the unpleasant part. Joel has said many times, if you are around any livestock operation, regardless of species, and you smell manure, you are smelling mismanagement.
Oh, well, this is super interesting to hear because I have friends that have backyard chickens and it does not smell bad at all. So maybe they're using this litter that you've mentioned, this, almost natural way of dealing with the manures. They're actually properly managing their chickens, I would say.
Absolutely. I've had the experience so many times when somebody came in to tour my chicken house. And at some point, if she had ever been in a chicken house before, at some point she would stop, look around and sniff and say, why doesn't it stink in here? So if you're in somebody's chicken house and it doesn't stink, I would bet that they are using deep litter as the best manure management.
Well, you can bet I'm going to go ask them if that's what they're doing. I'll be very curious. Now, I have noticed what you said is true, that it's easy care in that my friends have a little system. In the mornings, we do this. In the evenings, we do this. What are some of those morning habits that they need to have to help the chickens thrive? And what are the evening habits? Can you speak to us a little bit about that, Harvey?
Well, for me, morning time is the time to release the birds to the outside. So I think it is really important, however small your operation, to find some way to release the birds to get outside. And if you have a really, really small space to give them, you can always make a kind of two-decker setup where the upstairs is the sleeping quarters and the tightly secured part at night. And then downstairs from that, there's a little fenced run and a ramp to get down into the downstairs where they have more space and it's open to the sunlight. So that would be the minimum that still allow the chickens to get outside in the daytime. And if you have more space, you can set up a fenced run, fenced with chicken wire to protect from predators and allow them to be out in the sunshine. So first thing in the morning for me is to let them out, to check their water, make sure they have plenty of fresh water. That is so critical that they always have access to fresh water. And speaking of letting them out in the morning, you're going to let them out into a fenced run, typically. And people don't appreciate that you might let them out on a nice grassy run. But it doesn't matter how few chickens are in your micro flock. Sooner or later, they're going to denude that area of the very last blade of green grass. And after that, what do we see? We see a patch of bare dirt covered with chicken poops, waiting for the next rain to run for the closest water source. So we need to bring the deep litter concept from inside the house to the outside chicken run.
I was wondering about that. Yeah.
And you can cover the chicken run deeply in the same sorts of organic decomposables, spent plants from the garden, autumn leaves, deadheading from the flower beds, on and on and on. Whatever will break down in a compost heap, you put it in on that chicken run and let them naturally manage their manure in the same way we were talking about doing inside. So you ask about the night thing, what to do as you're putting to bed at night. Do keep in mind that you want to provide some kind of roost for them to be on at night, because even if you have them well protected from predators with a half-inch hardware cloth, for example, that provides plenty of ventilation, but is a barrier to predators, even those like raccoons who have very powerful paws. But even though they're well secured against predators, you want them to be psychologically secure. So be sure to give them a roost to sleep on at night. Another really important thing, Hilda, about nighttime, it is that it is the time of rodents. And I strongly advise, it's very common for people to feed leave feed out free choice for their chickens 24/7. That's a bad idea, because the rodents come out at night and it's like you've put up a sign over the feeder saying, "Be fruitful and multiply." And I promise you they will. So I think that best feeding practice during the day is to give them only the amount of feed they will clean up by late afternoon. And then when you shut them up at night, make sure there is no feed available for our rodent friends. Rodents are really the big draw for snakes to come in, who they have a reputation for coming in and eating eggs out of the nest box. Ask me how I know.
That one is from experience, huh?
I just last week had a black snake that came in and got a couple of my eggs.
Oh, my goodness.
They will also eat chicks if you have chicks in the hen house. But they're not coming looking for chicks or eggs. They're coming in looking for mice. And so if you don't do this free choice feeding and you minimize the small rodent population, then the snakes are not going to have much interest in coming in and having a free lunch of eggs or chicks.
Wow, that is so interesting. Well, you're mentioning feeding. What do you feed the chickens? I love it that they're omnivores. I've seen happy chickens on Joel's farm, actually, and on my friend's backyard farm, where they're just kind of pecking away at whatever they can find. But do you need to supplement? Obviously, you do. And what do you supplement with?
Well, I think the starting point, Hilda, is exactly what you were pointing. The starting point is not feed X, Y, or Z available to be purchased. We'll get to that. But the starting point is to see what that chicken will go for when feeding herself on her own in a natural situation. And I like to talk about the 3 food groups of chickens: green plants, seeds and fruits, and animal foods such as earthworms, grubs, slugs, and snails. Now, that's what chickens will eat by preference if they have the opportunity. But, of course, almost all of us are dependent to a greater or lesser extent on purchased feeds. So, the Weston A. Price folks certainly understand that food quality is everything for health and happiness. And it's the same for our chickens. Their best health is going to result from feeding the highest quality feed that you can find and afford. And of course, remember, if you are what you eat, you are what your chickens eat. When you eat those eggs, you're eating what they ate. So the best approach is this: buy the best feed that you can find. And also, what you feed should be as fresh as you can get. And then take every opportunity you can for maximizing their access to these high nutrient natural feed.
Hey, Harvey, this sounds like a good philosophy for people too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a point I try to make in my book, that when it comes to feeding chickens, it's just like feeding ourselves. We've got to read those labels. We've got to plan ahead. We've got to do more of our own food production. Same with how we feed our chickens.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Upgraded formulas. Oh, let's be honest, a lot of us spend a boatload on supplements each month, but we're not really sure if they're having the desired effect. Have you ever thought about how important it is to actually know your nutrient levels for understanding your performance and health? And wouldn't it be great if you also knew how much you were actually absorbing or not absorbing of the nutrients you're taking, and whether you have too much of something in your system? Well, I'm excited to say we now have a chance to accurately test all of that and therefore gain confidence about what the body needs to optimize health. I'm talking about Upgraded Formula's Upgraded Hair Test Kit and consultation, and the minerals which they offer, which absorb really, really well, so that you can vanquish any of those hidden deficiencies that are affecting your thyroid and adrenal function, and possibly much more. I just ordered my hair test kit to get started, and I can't wait to talk to their certified professionals to analyze my results. With Upgraded Labs testing, you can find out, for example, key mineral status, what your heavy metal toxicity levels are, the current state of your metabolism, and more. So test, don't guess. Check out the test and consultation at upgradedformulas.com and save 20% on your first purchase with code WISE at checkout. That's upgradedformulas.com and the code WISE. And Optimal Carnivore. You guys, Optimal Carnivore has a revolutionary new product called Brain Nourish. They have combined grass-fed beef brain and lion's mane mushrooms in a groundbreaking formula. It's the ultimate whole food nootropic to build a better brain. These 2 ancestral superfoods have been used for centuries to improve brain function and overall mental well-being. And now they're available for the first time together in convenient capsules. Studies have shown that both ingredients are remarkable at improving cognition and brain health, both in the short and the long term. Guaranteed to have your brain firing on all cylinders for supreme focus, elevated mood, improved memory, greater clarity, and enhanced creativity. And so many more benefits for health, vitality, and longevity, thanks to the highly nutritious superfood ingredients. Each serving has 1,500 milligrams of organic lion's mane and 1,500 milligrams of beef brain. They only use at Optimal Carnivore 100% real mushrooms, organic fruiting bodies, which are rigorously tested for active compounds. And the beef brain is sourced from the highest quality regenerative farms in New Zealand. The mission over at Optimal Carnivore is to make it easy for people to consume the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. And what I also love is that they also plant one tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So go check them out. Go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore. Check out their grass-fed organ complex, their grass-fed liver product, and the new Brain Nourish. And use the code Weston10 to receive 10% off your purchases. Again, that's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code Weston10. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
Wherever we live, we can find access for our birds to more natural feed. So, for example, I talked about giving our birds access to the outdoors. One way to do that is in a movable shelter, and move that small shelter maybe over your lawn or other grassy area where they can get a lot of green foods and some insects, and move it frequently enough so it doesn't damage the grassy sod. Or when we're working in the garden, if we find grubs and earthworms, if we trap Japanese beetles, all of those can be used as high-octane feeds for our birds. And spent plants in the garden are good feed. Outer wrapper leaves of cabbages and lettuces, kale, squash, and tomatoes, the still green vines that follow the sweet potato harvest, all of those are great feed. Speaking of sweet potatoes, understand I mean sweet potatoes, not regular potatoes. Those potato vines are poisonous, so we would never feed those to the chickens, but sweet potato vines, that's candy to a chicken. Now, I mentioned that small mobile shelter, right?
Yes.
And I mentioned that in regard to giving them access to natural feeds as you move them from day to day. But you move them often so that you won't damage the sod they're on, correct? But what if you left them long enough to do exactly that, to damage whatever is growing on that space? What I'm suggesting is, how about using a small mobile shelter in the garden? And then that constant scratching is a good thing, right? Because you can make a small shelter big enough, just wide enough to fit on one of your wide garden beds. And we should all be doing lots and lots of cover cropping, right? So when it's time to turn that cover crop in, rather than getting out some buzzing, bucking mechanical tiller to till in that cover crop, let the chickens do it. The small shelter will keep them out of the garden beds. They won't be eating the lettuces and tomatoes, but they will be tilling in a cover crop or a garden bed that's really heavily grown up in weeds. And rather than getting out there and fighting the jungle ourselves, let them do it. And they're getting green plants to eat, and they're finding earthworms and grubs. So that's a great way of intersecting their best interest with our best interest. You're giving them best access to healthful activities and good foods, and getting work done for us. Sounds like a heck of a deal to me.
Yes, I'm thinking this is a big win-win. And the reason it's a win-win-win even is when the payoff is eggs. So let's talk about that a little bit. Eggs are like one of my favorite foods because they just seem so perfect with all of their nutrients. And then from homegrown chickens, your own flock, it can't get much better than that, I imagine. Hilda,
you're right. It's just a vine-ripened tomato is the proverbial best home-produced food in comparison to that red thing in the supermarket that's labeled tomato, but you and I know better. And it's true with eggs, too. The difference between your backyard eggs and any supermarket eggs is just night and day. So, yes, let's consider the payoff, I call it. a first question people will want to know about level of production when they're planning their small flock, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the basic rule of thumb. Just for planning purposes, think in terms of getting 2 eggs per 3 hens per day. 2 eggs from every 3 hens in the flock per day.
Mm-hmm.
So that for planning purposes, think in those terms. Although we're talking about in the summertime when egg production is at its peak. In the wintertime, egg production drops off greatly, more or less, depending on which breed of chickens we're talking about. Now, inevitably, people want to know whether they should wash their eggs. Mm-hmm. And the answer is an emphatic no, if they come perfectly clean from the nest. And so you need to see to nest sanitation, put in fresh, clean straw frequently into the nest, keep that renewed. And if you do, most eggs are going to come from the nest perfectly clean. Do not wash such eggs. Mm-hmm. Actually, the hen, when she lays the egg, there's a kind of a wet coating. It's called the bloom, and it has antibacterial properties. And so the bloom, when it dries, actually is helping to protect the egg from contamination at the microscopic level.
Wow, so fascinating. I bet most people didn't know that, including me.
The shell of the egg is actually permeable to a gas exchange, to air, at the microscopic level. And so bacteria might possibly come in as well. So that bloom helps to protect against them. If an egg does have a smear of mud or, yes, occasionally poop, then I do wash those eggs with a 50-50 solution of white vinegar and water, wet paper towel in that solution, and wipe the egg clean. But if it comes clean from the nest, never do I wash an egg. And another common misunderstanding is that eggs must be refrigerated. The egg, before it is cracked, is designed by nature to last a long time at ambient temperatures. After all, when that bird in the wild is assembling a clutch of eggs over a course of 2 days, she's not laying an egg and then putting it in the refrigerator, is she? So the egg is designed not to spoil in ambient temperatures. So if you are going to eat those eggs within 10 days, there is no need to refrigerate. Don't put them in the bright light of a window. Don't put them beside a heat register. But if just cool, normal, ambient room temperature, if that's where they're going to be, they will easily keep for 10 days. If you need to keep them longer than that, then yes, put them in the refrigerator and they will last for weeks.
Wow. Another question I think beginners might be asking is, at what age do the chickens start laying? And I think, did I read in your literature 22 weeks or so? Is that right? That's
your average benchmark. It will vary by breed and other factors, such as nutrition, I'm sure. But as for planning purposes, think of 22 weeks as that time when you're going to first go out there and look into a nest and say, oh, wow! About 22 weeks. It is true that I call them super layer hybrids, the hybrid chickens that are bred for very high egg production and very early production. Some of those gals start laying at something like 17 weeks, even 16 weeks.
Wow.
But yeah, think of 22 weeks as about an average.
Well, Harvey, your wow reminded me of the childlike enthusiasm I've seen with my friends' kids who run to the chicken coop to gather the eggs. And there is this amazing joy and understanding of nature and how we're all interconnected that kind of comes with having backyard chickens, right? Talk to us a little bit about those intangibles.
Well, one intangible starts exactly where you just did, and that is with getting your children involved in the project. I doubt I have to convince you or a lot of other Weston A. Price people. Too many children are spending far too much time looking at tiny screens. And it behooves us to, just like we want to get our chickens outdoors, we want to get our children outdoors, out into the open, out into nature and its amazing networks and processes. And one way to draw them into that is to get them involved in this project of keeping a group of chickens in the backyard. And they will be learning far more about natural life and natural processes that way than they will ever learn from looking at tiny screens. So, we started out by talking about how easy chicken care can be. And so that's a great advantage when you think that means that feeding, watering, collecting eggs are easy enough even for the youngest children. And it's a way of getting them involved. And of course, you've seen it. They have fun with that. They look forward to it. And if you have enough hens so that you're producing some surplus, maybe your kids could have a little project of selling eggs to relatives and to friends. And that would be a great learning experience, even more so if they get into the details of calculating feed costs and what that implies for what you charge for your eggs and profit margins and so forth. So there's lots to be learned in every direction. One thing we didn't talk about earlier with regard to natural feeds is it's actually possible to cultivate decomposer organisms such as earthworms, black soldier fly grubs, mealworms, and so forth. These organisms that help break down organic materials, they're great chicken feed. And it's possible to cultivate some of those, like earthworms, as feed, high protein, high nutrient feed for chickens. And so this would be a great process for children as well, to have an earthworm rearing project in which they get directly involved in seeing these recycling processes of nature. And at the end of the process, there's this feed that they can give to their chickens. And finally, let me mention with regard to children, this may or may not turn out to be an option for many keepers, but from time to time, somebody may find that they have a hen that we say goes broody, settles into that mindset in which the hen wants to set on a clutch of eggs long enough, 21 days, to hatch out chicks and then to nurture them and to rear them and protect them. So if that should ever happen in your family, the family of any backyard flock of chickens, Hilda, this is a chance to share with your children magic and miracle, the miracle of new life and of mother love. I love working with broody hens myself. And in fact, I have never used an artificial incubator for eggs, never once. For hatching out chicks here on my place, I have always used natural mothers, broody hens. And I think that, it brings out the kid in me. It makes me gasp with joyous astonishment. And that is something that would be really wonderful to have the chance to share with children as well.
Absolutely. Well, I am so thankful for all the things that you've instructed us in today. This has been an amazing conversation. And I want to wrap up with the question I like to pose at the end here, Harvey. I don't even know if you know that I usually say this, but I always ask my guests, if the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do? Now, I know you're a farmer and not a doctor, but that's even better. If you would just offer one bit of advice for someone wanting to improve their health or their family's health, what would you recommend that they do?
There are several things that come to mind, but you have said the one thing. And so I would say that the one thing is to eat closer to the natural source, eat less processed food, eat food that has been cultivated and produced in more natural ways, eat food that has been produced with love and concern for your health and not just for the bottom dollar. So yeah, I think eating the greatest variety of foods you can manage that are just as unprocessed and just as close to the source and produced with as much integrity as is possible in your situation. That is the starting point for health. And then there are a lot of other things that follow. Acting like you've got some good sense, of course, and loving and caring for the people close to you, on and on and on. But it starts with the basis of life, what you eat.
Well, Harvey, thank you once again. This has been a wonderful conversation, and you've really, I'm sure, inspired a lot of people, including me. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda, for having me, and I've enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you.
Our guest today was Harvey Ussery. His website is themodernhomestead.us. And I'm Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me and resources at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this podcast episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Peach in the Pines has this to say: wisdom my heart resonates with. I just finished listening to episodes 369 and 370, and I have goosebumps in a good way. These episodes were so pure and delivered sound wisdom and truths that struck to the core of what is going on in the world today, shedding light on what so many struggle to grasp and understand. I love how these episodes discuss wisdom and truths that my heart can resonate with, but delivered in such a simple and easy to understand way. I love each and every episode and look forward to new ones. Hilda brings me peace and comfort to listen to her, and I also love when Sally is a guest speaker because her advice and knowledge always brings me encouragement and inspires me to pursue new ways to better my health. Thank you with all my heart for consistently bringing this information to light and unapologetically discussing topics that need to be shared. I've been wanting to leave this review for a long time, and I can't even form enough supporting words to express my gratitude and appreciation for this podcast. Highly recommend listening to it and suggest you don't wait another minute to get started. Peach in the Pines, this is super special. Honestly, it makes me want to cry. I'm very touched. So thank you. Thank you for leaving that review. And if you would like to leave us a review as well, go to Apple Podcasts and click on the ratings and reviews. Leave us as many stars as you like and tell us what you think of the show. And thank you for listening. That also means a lot. Stay well, my friend, and remember that all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.